to the 12th of April meeting of the West Devon Hub Committee. Welcome to all those members in the room and officers in the room and anyone who's joining us online. First item on the agenda is apologies for absence, and we do have some, Mr. White.
We do, thank you, Leader. Good afternoon, members. We have apologies from Councillors Cheadle, Councillor Leach, who is joining us via the Teams link, and Councillor Mott. Thank you, Leader.
Thank you, Mr. White. Item 2 on the agenda is declarations of interest. In accordance with the Code of Conduct, members are invited to declare any disclosable pecuniary interests, other registrable interests and non-registrable interests, including the nature and extent of such interests they may have in any items to be considered at the meeting. Are there any declarations of interest, members? I'm seeing none, Mr. White. Thank you. Item 3 is items requiring urgent attention. None have been brought to my attention. And Mr. White, can you confirm?
Mine, thank you, Leader. Confirm. Thank you.
Thank you. So item 4 is confirmation of minutes. If we could just have a look at the minutes for accuracy and confirmation that they represent an accurate record of the meeting. Is there anything, members, on page 1 of the minutes? Page 2? Page 3? And page 4? In which case, Mr. White, I'm happy to take those as being a true and fair reflection of the meeting.
Thank you, Leader.
Item 5 is public questions. I haven't been notified of any, and there are no members of the public present.
We've received none. Thank you, Leader.
Thank you. So, members, item 6, Hub Forward Plan. In front of you is the normal copy of the Hub Forward Plan. I think if we can just have a quick look at this for completeness and accuracy. And does anyone have any comments or any items they would like to raise in relation to forthcoming topics that are on the forward plan? Is Councillor Leach with us online? Would somebody alert me if Councillor Leach wishes to speak? Thank you. In which case, if everyone's in agreement, we'll accept the forward plan as recorded and as submitted as part of the meeting papers. Item 7 is an amendment of the off-street parking places order, and I wonder whether I could pass over to Councillor Pearce to introduce this paper. Councillor Pearce.
Thank you, Chairman. This is quite a straightforward report, a well-written report, and it's essentially a technical paper following the government making moving traffic enforcement powers under the Traffic Management Act available to councils. They have also taken the opportunity to consolidate the existing civil enforcement regimes. This report therefore seeks to make a legislative amendment to the off-street parking order to the most recent 2022 regulations. Although as a council we will not be undertaking moving traffic enforcement, as this is a Devon County Council on-street parking function relating to parking such as in box junctions. These legislative changes must be amended to ensure we are compliant with our parking enforcement and quoting the correct regulations when issuing penalty charge notices. So this is not something that we can vote against or anything. It's a government legislation, and the report is very comprehensive in explaining the reasons for this coming before us today.
Thank you, Councillor Pearce. I suppose if we were minded to, we could vote against it, but it presumably be very little point.
Well, the problem is now, once we got to the 1st of June, we wouldn't be able to collect any parking fees for non-paying of parking tariffs.
Okay, I think that's understood. Thank you. Members, any questions? Any questions coming forward? So, Councillor Pearce, could I ask you perhaps to move the recommendations?
Thank you, Chairman. I move the recommendations as set out at item 1 and 2.
Thank you, members. We're in debate. Any debate on this topic? We're not getting anything coming forward, so we'll move to a vote. All those in favour?
That's unanimous. Thank you, Leader.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Councillor Pearce. We move to item 8, which is the Housing Strategy Year 2 Update and Homelessness Strategy 2022-2027. If I could ask Councillor Ratcliffe to introduce this paper. Councillor Ratcliffe.
Thank you, Leader. I would like to introduce the 2 papers we have, which will be found on pages 15 to 92 of this agenda. The first part is the Housing Strategy Review for 2022-2023, the Action Plan. The Joint Housing Strategy, better known as Homes Better Living, was adopted by South Hams and West Devon Borough Councils in April 2021. Our progress against the actions set out in the 2021-22 Action Plan have been significant, and many involve taking a creative approach to ensuring public safety in light of the pandemic and the resultant restrictions. Achievements include completion of housing needs survey and consultations, attendance of parish council meetings using virtual technologies, completion and occupation of properties in Tavistock using virtual viewing prior to sign-ups, launch of the Enhanced Tenants Incentive Scheme, secured planning consent for the redevelopment of the Springfield Hostel, creation of housing needs mapping system, and the new action plan for 22-23, reflecting the priorities set out in the corporate strategy, a plan for West Devon, and housing crisis declaration. Part 2, the Homelessness Strategy 2022 to 2027. Following a highly engaging period of consultation, we are pleased to introduce the new 5-year homeless strategy for South Hams and West Devon. The aim and objectives that shape this homelessness strategy have been designed to build on the progress we've made over the past 5 years. Notable achievements from the last strategy are the prevention and relief of homelessness for 707 in the past 4 years, maintenance of very low rough sleeper numbers through the introduction of a dedicated rough sleeper outreach, and introduction of the Seymour letting scheme in West Devon and launching of the Seymour Homeless website. Whilst building on these achievements, the strategy reflects the need to be proactive and to address challenging highlights caused by the housing crisis and respond flexibly to changing needs across our communities. We have framed our strategy around 4 key groups to enable the response, the responding flexibility to the differing needs of our residents, ensuring the customers' needs are central to the work we do. Leader, I commend these papers and invite members' questions.
Thank you, Councillor. Members, any questions on the papers and documents in front of you? Not any. Councillor Edmonds.
Thank you, Chair. I see in the strategy, I think our achievements, we overachieved our affordable housing target by 86 homes, I think it was. That's really good. That's good news. But I think that's across the 2 councils. I'm just wondering, and I wouldn't expect that perhaps information today, but it might be quite helpful as part of our housing crisis to understand a bit more how that looks in West Devon and where we are in terms of achieving our West Devon numbers, and that might help us to assess the need or the demand of our affordable housing.
Thank you, Councillor. Is Mrs. Rehag able to answer that for us?
I'm smiling because we've been working on that with some crisis and how far we've come with the actions that this is. You will have that in short. I just don't know when that's.
Brilliant. Would that include where the affordable houses are being delivered, what parts of the borough?
Yeah, so we're going to break that down by scheme, the type of housing that's been delivered and the size of housing that's been delivered, because that fits in with all the downsizing initiatives as well that we're bringing forward. So we want to be able to pinpoint people to where the opportunities are for people to downsize as well.
Really good information. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions, members? Do you need a moment? We'll go to Councillor Crozier in the meantime.
The question I would like to ask is on the incentive scheme. It's been up and running for a couple of months now. I just wondered if we've had any offers.
Is that how it, if it's red, does that mean?
Yes.
We have had a lot of inquiries. We've had a significant increase in applications to Devon Home Choice for the downsizing purpose. We've got one person who is just going through the process now. That's the first person. Unfortunately, we haven't had a great deal of smaller properties become available in the last 3 months. So there hasn't necessarily been many properties for people to downsize to. But the headline is it's a good news. We're seeing a lot of interest and a lot of uptake.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. That's really interesting. Councillor Edmonds, are you ready with your second question?
Apologies here. I can't find it now, but it was around housing needs analysis. I think we've got an action point to conduct housing needs analysis in priority areas. I think the action point, I can't quite find the action point, but I wonder if we've identified or how we identified those priority areas. I think this is a really positive step, particularly, if it identifies perhaps larger sort of villages as well, where I'm sure there's a real need for affordable housing. So I'd be very interested in that bit of work and what progress has been made. Thank you.
I've got the right button now. There's quite a lot of work that's been undertaken at the moment by George Sanderson, who works within he sits between us in affordable housing and strategic planning team. So a lot of those maps that we showed you previously as members, they've really come on now. So we've started to highlight some of those areas where we've got properties coming up, what the overall need is for those in bands A to D, and we're just including band D in that as well. So that should be ready to share with members very, very shortly. It's just in the refining process at the moment. So from there on, we'll be able to whittle down to where those areas of need are, where we need to focus more intensely on perhaps doing some more in-depth work.
Okay. But is it the housing needs assessment? Perhaps I used the wrong term. In priority areas, will that include then sort of, some small, Beer Alstons, York Taunton's, Liftons, or perhaps even smaller communities where we can properly assess the true need for affordable housing, because the supply tends to be in the larger towns, typically Oakhampton, Tunstall, but I'd like to get a feel of what is the need across the borough and then maybe look at smaller schemes in those areas identified.
Yes, so I was at a parish council meeting recently, and Councillor Crozier will recall that we did agree to do a housing needs survey within the Beerferris parish to assist them with update their neighbourhood plan. And obviously we've got some allocated sites there. We want to understand exactly what the need is for the site type, tenure of all the dwellings that may come forward there. There is also a housing needs survey due to take place in Princetown. So actually we're concentrating on some of those smaller, more rural areas that we haven't targeted as much before. We've got Brentwood in the process of being surveyed, so we should have a good update for you on all of those shortly.
That's good work. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rehab. The information you were talking about and the maps and so on sounds to me as that would be a really good topic for discussion at informal council as part of our work on the housing crisis and bringing members up to date. So I wonder whether we could consider that at an appropriate time and as early an opportunity as possible. Thank you. Got a question coming from Councillor Ewings, who is online. Councillor Ewings.
Good afternoon, members and officers. I was just going to ask if the information, some of the information that Councillor Edmonds has asked for, will that be available next week at ONS, please, when we review the housing strategy?
Some of it may be. I don't want to commit to saying definitely yes, but we will have, even if some of it isn't final, the final documents, at least members will be able to have a look at it and start to get a feel for how that work is taking shape. Does that help?
Yeah, I think the first question that Councillor Edmonds asked was in relation to, you know, did we have, of those 86 houses that have been built over both authorities, it's knowing how many were built in West Devon, as Councillor Edmonds said, and whereabouts. So that information must be quite easy to get because they've been built. And we have been asking for the information since the beginning of the year via ONS. So it would be really good to have it, please. We don't need a document. I don't need documents, even if it's just a verbal report. We just would like to see some figures, please.
Yeah, we can have that. That's not a problem.
Thank you. Thank you, sweetheart. Thank you, Councillor. Any other questions, councillors? In which case, if I can ask Councillor Ratcliffe to move the recommendations.
Thank you, Leader. Yes, I would like to move the two recommendations to be found on page 15 of this agenda.
Thank you. Can we have a seconder, please? Councillor Edmonds, thank you. Members, we're into debate. Any debate on these very important topics? We answered the questions. Anything anybody wants to add? Councillor Daniel.
Yes, I was quite interested in the questions about small developments in smaller communities, because I think that's something that there does seem to be a need across our smaller communities for affordable housing, so they can stay in the places where they have connections. And I think that's something that's come up in the JLP as well, that perhaps they haven't, as we've mentioned, they concentrate on the larger urban type places and not so much on the smaller ones. And I think that's something that we do need to take on board, that, you know, our villages are going to remain stagnant if we don't get a bit more housing and new people able to move in or to stay where they can have their families. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Daniel. Councillor Edmonds.
Yeah, I agree with Councillor Daniel, and I perhaps just add to that I totally agree. It is important that we expand, the affordable housing into these smaller communities, particularly those communities perhaps with primary schools. And I'd like to see those perhaps as the priority areas, so that we can keep those schools fully populated, and all the associated benefits for that community that comes with that. I also think it's a good opportunity for maybe local builders, smaller builders, to build perhaps small numbers of houses in these priority villages. Not necessarily, because probably not something that the national developers would be interested in. So I think it's also a knock-on effect of it's good for our local economy at the same time.
Thank you, Councillor. I think that's noted. I'm sure within the thriving towns and villages in the JLP there is provision to do that. It's a question, I think, of bringing it about. So I think we've noted that, and we'll try and get things in place to make that happen. Councillor Pearce.
Thank you, Chairman. I totally agree with the previous two speakers. The problem we have at the moment is that we're reliant on the mass house builders, the majors, providing the affordable housing which we require. Should there be a major slowdown in the housing market for full purchase price properties, how do we stand if the builders aren't building the houses? Will they build our affordable ones that we want, without, even if the market slows down to the extent. I think this is why we need to be looking and encouraging the smaller builders to develop in the villages where there are primary schools. We're too reliant on the major developers in our main towns to provide the affordable housing. And I think, with the way the economic situation is going to be later this year, I think we could have quite a slowdown in the building industry. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Pearce. I'm not sure there's any signs of any slowdown as yet, but I think we're all in agreement with the points that are being put forward. And I think some of those points were mentioned when we passed the resolution on the housing crisis. So we will bear all that in mind. Thank you for making those points.
If I could come back, one thing I did pick up on was the graph of the house prices, which I can't remember which page it's on now. I mean, it's a very, very comprehensive report that's been put together, and I thank officers for the work they've done on this. It really is incredible. But the house prices were taken from 2020, and when you look at the difference in my village then compared to now, what's happened in the last 18 months since the pandemic took place is quite scary. It really is, the way house prices have escalated. So I think we need to bear that in mind as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, one of the factors I think that caused us to think about the motion that we passed about the housing crisis in any event. So thank you for raising that, Councillor Pearce. Any other debate, members? In which case we'll move to a vote. All those in favour of the recommendations?
Thank you. That's unanimous for those recommendations. Thank you.
Thank you, members. We're to item 9 on the agenda, the Revenue and Benefits Service Review update. If I could ask Councillor Edmonds to introduce this paper, please. Councillor Edmonds.
Thank you, Chair. The purpose of this report is to update members on the Revenues and Benefits Service Review that was undertaken last year. Prior to the review, the Council's internal auditors had identified scope for improvement in the areas of council tax, business rates and housing benefits, which helped to inform the scope of the review as summarised in section 3.5 of the report. Following the review, an implementation plan was drawn up, incorporating all the service review and internal audit recommendations. A project team has been set up to support the implementation of the review, which meets weekly to discuss progress with action plans. The report in front of you today provides a valuable insight into the Revenues and Benefits Service and the scope and volume of work undertaken by the team. For example, the service is responsible for collecting £169 million in council tax and business rates across both councils, and the administration of £22 million of housing benefits. The team's workload increased significantly during the pandemic, when they were asked to support the administration of over 27,000 business grants and more than 2,000 personal grants, such as track and trace and administering benefit schemes, whilst maintaining core service delivery. And the first report recommendation asked the Health Committee to acknowledge this excellent achievement. Until October 2021, the Revenues and Benefits Service formed part of the wider Housing Revenues and Benefits Service area, with overall responsibility for all 3 services resting with one head of service. Following the prioritisation of homes in the corporate strategy and the declaration of the housing emergency, the existing head of service is now solely leading the housing service. The Revenues and Benefits Service does not currently have a head of service, and one of the outcomes from the review is to recruit to that role. This post would be self-funded from having a stretching performance target to increase the council tax collection rates by at least 0.5% in each council, improving recovery rates, reducing age debt and delivering service improvements across the council tax, business rates and housing benefit services. In summary, the review and subsequent implementation plan strives to achieve the strategic aims of maximising and making the best use of the council's resources, improving customer service whilst maximising financial recovery and ensuring our customers are being supported in the best possible way. A further update will be provided to members in 6 months' time when the newly appointed head of service will be in situ and will have embedded further improvements in accordance with the improvement plan. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Edmonds. Members, any questions on the paper? Councillor Daniel.
I just want to ask how realistic it is that we're going to improve our council tax arrears collections, because as we've heard numerous times, people are already struggling with the increase in prices of everything that they need to buy. And I'm wondering, if this is going to cause further hardship, if we put a lot of pressure on people for collection of arrears, and know how much we're going to support the more vulnerable members of our community. Thank you.
That's a very fair question. Last year's collection rate held up very well. In fact, the last couple of years, even through the pandemic, which is to the credit of the residents of West Devon, and through an extremely challenging time, probably the most challenging time for many people. But as you say, things have moved on. It will be challenging, but I guess that is one for the newly appointed head of service. The council's council tax support scheme will be very much in place, and other forms of financial help. I don't think there'll be any unreasonable pressure brought to bear on residents. Quite the opposite. I think we'll be looking for ways to help them, support them, listen to them, and to help wherever possible. It will be challenging, obviously. So I think that is one for the head of service, the newly appointed head of service, to come to terms with. But I'm sure will be done in a professional and compassionate manner. I don't know if Mr. Molyneux perhaps has got any further thoughts on that point.
Thank you, if that's okay, Leader. Well, actually, Councillor Edmonds, you made the point at the end there about the additional benefits and schemes that we have to support residents, and I've been discussing with the Chief Executive about the possibility of doing an all-member briefing on all the different types of additional benefit schemes that we operate as a council and support that we offer residents. We have a vulnerability officer who works with those in real need, putting them in touch with third party and the third sector to help them. Plus we have all these different schemes. We have discretionary housing payments. We've got the council tax energy rebate that's going to be going to residents in bands A to D. There's a discretionary scheme for that. There's emergency housing fund. There's likely to be a new tranche of funding for the housing, the household support grants. So there's lots of different schemes, and we do provide individuals from not just one of those schemes. If required, we can provide pots of funding from all the different schemes to help individual residents. So we do that on a regular basis, but I think it's probably the sort of work that goes on in the background and most members don't see it, and I think it will be really helpful to give members the overview of that, and that's what we're looking to do in the next month or so.
Thank you, Mr. Molyneux. I think that'd be really helpful. Any other questions, members? In which case, can I ask Councillor Edmonds to move the recommendations on the report?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Yeah, I move the 5 recommendations, which can be found on page 93 of your agenda papers. Thank you.
Thank you. Could we have a seconder, please? Councillor Crozier, thank you. Members, any debate on this issue? Councillor Pearce.
Thank you, Leader. I think what's been set out in the report must make members realise just what an incredible workload that we've dealt with over the last 2 years. This is on top of our normal day-to-day work, and for officers, and I think it's been outstanding when you see the number of grant awards and test and trace claims and all that sort of thing. It really is incredible. So I think this appointment is something we have to support to help out the team as a whole. It's very important. I think that we maintain the high standards that we've had. So I fully support the recommendations.
Thank you, Councillor Pearson. Obviously, one of the, as you quite rightly said, the recommendations was to recognise the achievements of the team throughout the pandemic in doing all that extra work, which has been fantastic and really well received, particularly by local businesses. I know that. Any other debate, members? Councillor Crozier.
Yeah, I'd just like to echo the words of Councillor Pearce, actually, because I know in my own district, I've been involved in helping a number of people, and the workload that the staff have endured over the last 2 years has been incredible, and I commend all of them in that department and others who have been involved in that for the work they've done. They've obviously worked a lot more hours than they would normally work in order to get through it all. Thank you, that's what I say.
Thank you. Any other debate, members? I think, as said, it's very important to recognise that this appointment is to the Revenues and Benefits team. Hopefully it will enable us to be more efficient and more effective at gathering in tax that is due, but also in dealing with the benefits side and making sure that those individuals that need help can access that help through the benefits that we offer. So overall, a really good and balanced suggestion and proposal, I think. I can't see any other debate, so we'll move to a vote. Members, all those in favour of the recommendations?
That's unanimous. Thank you, Leader.
Thank you, members. We can move to item 10 on the agenda now, which is the Climate Change and Biodiversity Action Council Net Zero Date. If I could ask Councillor Daniel to introduce this paper. Councillor Daniel.
Thank you. I'm introducing this interim report on our Net Zero Action Plan, which was adopted on the 4th of the 12th, 2020. Our council aim is to be a net zero council by 2030. Progress towards this aim and our carbon savings so far on scope 1 and 2 have been the electrification of the vehicle fleet as they come up for renewal. This is in progress, and we understand it's not so easy with the larger vehicles such as the waste fleet. So that's under review. EV panels on council buildings. This project is already in place on some council buildings, and also the use of renewable energy providers for energy needs and the use of wastewater where possible. Flexible working. This has been in place for some time and further improvements are possible to further reduce our carbon emissions. Carbon literacy training for senior management team. This has taken place and West Devon is now a carbon literate organisation and expected to have a substantial leadership role in delivering carbon zero transition action. Biodiversity net gain. To assist West Devon to reach a 10% increase in biodiversity by 2025. We've got 8 hectares of natural regeneration land planned, which is expected to increase our biodiversity by 80% on that land over 5 years. We're also looking at other areas where we can increase biodiversity. There is information for town and parish councils on our website as to how they can achieve an increase in biodiversity on the lands that they manage. And also we've just heard that Stone Lane Gardens, who are members of our West Devon Climate Change and Biodiversity Forum, and also the hold the national collection for birch and alder trees, have donated 26 assorted birch, including 1 alder, trees for community planting in Tavistock. This is planned to take place in late April at Bishopsmead Public Green Space alongside the Tiddy Brook. It will greatly enhance the appearance and biodiversity of this area, and it will be along the National Cycle Network. It will be planted by Park Life Southwest, a social enterprise which supports community environmental projects. with the appropriate guard, stakes and follow-up watering, which is very important. So thanks to Adam Williams, our officer for this project, and Stone Lane Gardens for the donation of the trees. Electric charging points. The current situation is, sorry, the current situation is there's an initial lease in place on the Bedford car park in Tavistock. The equipment has been installed, but unfortunately there's a 13-week wait for Western Power Distribution to connect to the charging points. We have raised concerns at this time, but we may possibly be able to be connected in May, but we haven't had confirmation of this. Chagford and Hatherley charging point schemes are now with our West Devon legal team and Scottish Power for contracting. And then the same process will take place for installation and leasing. And then following that will be Abbey Car Park in Tavistock and Oakhampton. The tendering for the Beer Alston project will be Pilgrim Car Park project has been completed. We're having an evaluation at the moment and then contracting. This will happen potentially by the end of April, beginning of May. We're hoping to have it all in place by the end of the year, but as you can hear, we've got a number of hold-ups in the system which are out of West Devon's control. We've done well on our scope 1 and 2 carbon reductions, but scope 3 is much more difficult because it's mostly out of the control of the council. So the proposition that is coming towards council today is that we have EV panels on our 2 leisure centres. The proposal is that we loan £300,000 to Fusion Leisure to install these electric photovoltaic panels on both of the leisure centres. This will give them potential savings on their energy costs. And it's one of the very few things we can do that will reduce our scope 3 carbon emissions. And the leisure centres are one of the biggest emitters of carbon across West Devon under the scope 3, if you've looked at the pie chart. So the key point of this action is to reduce carbon emissions overall. And this is one of the few ways we can do it. The economic benefits will be that these buildings are our own buildings. So it will bring them up to more energy efficient standards overall. It will reduce the heating bills, which are continuing to rise. And there will be savings from the reductions in the cost of the energy. And the effectiveness of EV panels, they are proven technology that we can access now. They have up to 20 years lifespan and will provide renewable energy. I commend this plan to the Hub as it will help us achieve our carbon reductions, which is one of our aims. Thank you.
Thank you. Going to invite questions from members. Just to remind you that the appendix to this paper is exempt. So if anybody wants to ask specific questions about that, we'll have to move into part 2. Councillor Edmonds.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. My question is on 6.2, which is on page 112. And it tells us there that in 2022, the centres in West Devon and Southampton forecast to use a cost of around £300,000 in electricity. I'm just wondering, does that figure reflect the current increases we're currently seeing in the marketplace?
I can't answer that.
Mr. Power.
Thank you, Chair. No, it doesn't reflect present costs, so those costs will be high now.
Yeah, thank you. It could be fair to say it could be substantially higher, and a lot of this project is driven on the cost savings. Does that perhaps in any way change the viability assessment of the proposed loan, or not?
Mrs. Buckle, I think, can answer that.
Yeah. Thank you. I think if anything, Leader, it would increase the viability of the loan, because obviously this would aid Fusion's financial resilience. It would mean that it's reducing their exposure to energy price increases by having the solar panels on the building.
Thank you, Mrs. Buckley. It seems clear that prices at the moment are only going in one direction, and whatever happens will affect Fusion's financial resilience, and we are obviously seeking to get some contributions from them at some point as well. So if nothing else, this at least maintains the status quo, but hopefully goes beyond that. So thank you for that. Councillor Crozier.
Have we put the photovoltaic panels out to tender yet? Do we have a fixed price on this, or is this just the estimated price?
We haven't yet gone out to tender on that, and the report contains some indicative figures, but we are asking members for approval of a loan of up to 300,000. So we have included in there some contingency as well. Thank you.
Dare I ask what sort of contingency?
I suspect that might be exempt information at this point.
It's well covered within the amounts.
It's well covered within the amounts is the advice that I'm given. Thank you.
We'll come back.
Chairman, it's around 20%. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Pearce.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm just wondering, with the trees that we're planting in various parishes and towns, and it's good news about what's going to be done at Bishopsmead, are we including the town council in providing information to them about what we're doing?
Sorry, I'd like to come back to. I would think it's one part of our role as councillors, being representative of West Devon on our local town and parish councils, to provide that information and direct them towards our website, which is quite comprehensive as to what town and parish councils can do and achieve on their own land.
I think you've missed the point, actually. Sorry about that. Bishopsmead coming under town council's area. We're going to be planting trees in Bishopsmead. I think it would be a courtesy to advise the town council that this is what we are going to be doing. It's not down to members to do. I think it's down to us as the higher authority to advise the town council what the plans are.
Thank you. Mr. Powell.
Certainly, yeah, that is the case. This is fresh off the press today. My understanding is Rob Secula works closely with all the town councils, and it's a network of discussion around appropriate sites. So I'll be very surprised if he hasn't, but I will confirm with you that that is the case.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr.
Can
Powell.
I have another question?
Of course you can,
Chairman,
Councillor
please?
Pearce.
Because unfortunately I wasn't at the hub briefing last week. While it's really good news about the solar panels, I do have concerns about the Meadowlands structure, and I hope a comprehensive investigation has gone into the load bearing of having that extra weight on the roof. Thank you.
Mr. Powell, if you could answer that one. I'm sure that's been factored in, but I'll pass it over to you.
Yes, certainly it has. The initial surveys have looked at the structural integrity of the building to ensure that they can hold arrays. Further work will be done when obviously we get the actual companies out to do the quotes and the tenders, but clearly it needs to be done safely and ensure that it lasts for at least 20 years.
Okay, fine. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions, members? In which case, Councillor Daniel, I wonder whether I could ask you to move the recommendation.
I propose the three recommendations on page 105. Sorry, I propose the three recommendations on page 105 of the agenda papers.
Thank you. Could we have a seconder, please? Councillor Edmonds, thank you. Members, any debate? Councillor Edmonds.
Thank you, Chair. Well, I support this proposal. You know, as the report states, that the council plays an important role in community leadership and setting the right example and raising awareness of the climate emergency. So it's good to see that we're seen to be taking action to reduce our carbon emissions and putting our own house in order, so to speak, or perhaps in this case, our leisure centres in order. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other debate, members? In which case we'll move to a vote. So all those in favour of the recommendations?
That is unanimous. Thank you, Leader.
Thank you, members. We move now to item 11, a plan for West Devon quarterly progress report. Members will be, I'm sure, only too aware of that the plan for West Devon was adopted in September 2021. And as lead members, together with officers, we continue to implement the delivery plan, and we're now moving into a phase of monitoring performance against that plan, a task which lead members will carry out, aided by their thematic advisory groups. The advisory groups will also be involved in refining the 2023-24 delivery plans to be approved by the council in the autumn this year. Attached to the paper Appendix A is set out performance against targets and shows significant progress against those targets. Appendix B sets out a suggested suite of key performance indicators consisting of relevant measures which can be benchmarked against other councils. Hub and lead members are asked to consider and highlight any further areas where additional reporting can be used to measure and perhaps improve performance. Such additions could be suggested at any time via lead officers, including following discussions with your advisory groups if appropriate. The reports show good progress and continued commitment to measure and benchmark our performance. The Hub Committee will be asked to recognise that progress and endorse the KPIs. On that note, I wonder if there are any questions from members about the papers and the reports in front of you. If there are no questions, members, I take it that the reports are clear and show exactly what they purport, that we're making good progress against those targets. And that being the case, I'd like to move the recommendations. There are 3 recommendations on page 119 of your papers. If I could have a seconder, please. Thank you, Councillor Evans. Members, any debate? In which case we'll move to a vote. All those in favour of the recommendations?
That's unanimous. Thank you, Leader.
Thank you, members. And members, that brings today's proceedings to a close. So thank you all for your attendance. Thank you for your contribution, and thank you to those that have followed proceedings online. And I